A very common question that I'm getting a lot and also a very hot topic at the moment is if it is still relevant to use jQuery today. I believe it is very confusing mainly for newcomers to understand if they should start using it or abandon it forever, and that's why I did create this video. Of course, a short disclaimer before I start, as it is always subjective to decide which framework or library you will use. Please have in mind that this is only my personal opinion based on my 10 years experience using jQuery. So if you disagree, that's very normal, so please be kind on your comments below. So first thing first, let's go back 10 years before when jQuery was the God-sent library for JavaScript. The main problem that jQuery wanted to solve was to have a library that can solve the most common issues on JavaScript and to also solve the browser compatibility problems. So first of all, thank you John Resig to create this library. And I remember it very clearly that jQuery was all over the internet that days. You were finding more articles and forum questions about jQuery rather than JavaScript itself. Many people was confusing it with JavaScript as their functions were making total sense to be in the browser natively. In fact, some jQuery functions are now implemented in JavaScript for the most browsers such as Closest. The most common problem that jQuery solved that days was that you didn't have to rewrite your functions to work for other browsers. jQuery smoothly worked for the most browsers back then. However, the last 4 years this problem doesn't exist anymore. Even the default mobile browsers these days are really supporting many features. So that's why people were start asking, do I really need to use jQuery anymore? But before answering this question, don't worry, we're getting there, we need to know what are our alternatives. We have 3 options here. The first one is to use transformation tools, or as we also know them as transpilers or compilers, such as Babel. That simply means that if your browser is not supporting the new features or functions, you can always transpile them to work on older browsers. By simply putting it, we will use any new feature that our favorite browsers support and then have Babel to care for older browsers. Option 2, and a trend at the moment, is to only use Vanilla.js. For people that doesn't know what Vanilla.js means, is to not use any JavaScript framework at all, or else in a simple phrase, if you can write the code and run it in any current browser without additional tools or compile steps, it's Vanilla.js. Usually the problem with this option is that it's not a recommended way if you would like to support older browsers. The third option is to replace the jQuery with simple functions. There is a specific website for that with name youmightnotneedjQuery.com that it has literally all the functions of jQuery replaced with simple JavaScript functions, and they are also supported for the most browsers. Of course, be careful as they are also mentioning at their website, quote, at the very least make sure that you know what jQuery is doing for you and what it's not, end quote. So, we have 3 alternative options that we can choose instead of using jQuery, and of course, each of them has pros and cons as everything in life. We will not going through them right now as I would like to focus only to jQuery at the moment. But if we have 3 alternatives for jQuery, why to use it anyway? Or let's answer a more difficult question. Is there really any point to use jQuery for a new project? For example, a project that we are starting now from scratch. My answer that many people doesn't expect me to say is yes. There are many reasons to use jQuery nowadays. First of all, the main reason to use it is simplicity. You can write jQuery even if you don't know JavaScript at all. I know people with just some very basic knowledge of HTML and CSS that they had successfully implemented some basic JavaScript stuff such as jQuery slideshow and jQuery menu with a quick copy-paste of some code. By the way, let me know at the comments below if you would like me to create another video to learn JavaScript and jQuery from scratch. The second main reason to use it is the plugins that jQuery has. There are a lot of plug-and-play plugins that you can literally implement them with few lines of code. Some examples are like Select2, that with only one line of code you can get a select element with a search functionality. or jQuery UI date picker that with one line of code you can have a full functioning date picker from a simple input. And of course slideshows, galleries and everything you can imagine by simply googling it and download the files without the need to transpile any of the code. But of course jQuery is not only magic and fairy tales, and that's why I did create a list with cons and pros so you can decide if you would like to use it or not. Now the main disadvantage is that because jQuery is oversimplifying things, it is easier to create spaghetti code and it will make it much harder to debug our code at the future. So it is very possible that projects that are using jQuery would probably have bad code in them. The main cause of that is that you will usually find it in legacy projects. And of course this is not the jQuery's fault, but rather from people that are blindly copy-pasting code. At the most cases, it is really difficult to change even slightly the jQuery libraries. For example, I did try to change the jQuery bootstrap modal and it took me ages in order to configure it for grocery CRUD. At the end, of course, I did end up to refactor the half of their plugin, and to be honest, this is something very common that I'm doing, as usually the plugins have really complex code without a specific reason. One more disadvantage is that some people or teams may think that it is an unnecessary heavy tool, as the most methods are already in vanilla JavaScript. Also, jQuery can be easily replaced with polyfills such as Babel polyfill, as it is much lighter and straightforward. So in reality, if your team has experienced JavaScript developers, there is not really a need to use jQuery, unless of course if your customers are still using Internet Explorer 7. And lastly, from my experience, jQuery can really make the everyday life of big teams harder. So if you are a medium to big size team, try to avoid using jQuery, as it is easier to invest some time learning React or Angular. A simple example from my experience is to use a plugin in jQuery rather than to create the plugins from scratch. At the end, of course, it takes more time for your team to configure the already existing plugin rather than it will take time to create the plugin from scratch. And of course, don't forget the advantages of using jQuery. First of all, and most obvious, is that it is a robust and stable library, and it works even for very old browsers. Second, it is a common language for the majority of the developers, even nowadays. If you simply say the words, "My website is mainly using jQuery," you can find easily developers that can understand your code and can work with you without too much guidance if your code is well written, of course. Third one, don't forget that it is a great choice for small projects and quick demos. For example, if you want to create a quick proof of concept, the fastest way to do that is with jQuery. Fourth, and very important, you can learn jQuery faster in comparison with many other libraries that exist currently, such as React or Angular. Moreover, you can write jQuery even if you don't know JavaScript at all. I personally know people with just some very basic knowledge of HTML and CSS, and they've created their website without any guidance. I was impressed, as they are not even programmers and they've created a full functional website. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it is good to just copy-paste stuff from the internet. What I'm trying to say is that if you are not a programmer and you work on a personal project, it is very inspiring to see things working. So, as a summary, if you are a beginner in JavaScript and you don't want to spend too much time to learn JavaScript, then it is just fine to use jQuery and don't feel bad about it. I am always with the opinion to start learning something new with the easiest tools that exist in order to love what you are doing first. And of course, once you are more familiar with the tools and you believe you would like to go one step further, you can start replacing some jQuery functions with JavaScript functions just to get more familiar with vanilla JavaScript. And lastly, if you feel bad because you load a heavy library at your website, here are some websites that today are using jQuery at their main websites: Microsoft.com, StackOverflow.com, and Twitter.com. Also, according to W3Tech's link that I have at the description below, jQuery is used by 97% of all the websites whose JavaScript library we know. This is in total 73% of all websites that exist. So it is just fine to use jQuery nowadays, as far as you understand, of course, the pros and cons. I hope this video helped you to understand some basic facts about jQuery and make it a bit more clear to decide if you will use it or not. And as always, if you like the video, don't forget to smack this like button below. And of course, click the subscribe button if you would like to see more videos like that. Till the next video, I hope you all have a good day.